In this video, we will see the solutions to quiz number 2, where you were given 3 models, supposedly working, but for example, in this one, you'd accidentally loaned it out to your finance professor, and apparently the improvements did more harm than good. So we're going to go through the model and see what we can find wrong. We'll list where we found it, what the original formula was, how we fixed it, and do a little bit of explanation. Okay, so first let's look at the model and see what it does. We have some inputs up here, a cash flow multiple and a discount rate. Looks like our outputs are a growth rate and NPV, net present value. And then when we look below, we see that we have a time series of data by year, and we have some cash flows by year. Looks like the first 4 years of that are historical, so that's what actually happened with the company. And since you did 3 of these 2 days before the quiz, you knew that your model was supposed to come in and forecast during this explicit period, and then use a terminal value to estimate the value beyond that explicit period. So you know that the growth rate should be calculated from the historical period. And we care about the first point and the last point, and the 2 points in between don't matter at all. We could use the rate function for this, or the formula. The author chose to use the formula. Take the first and last values to 1 over the exponent of 1 over the number of periods. But the author couldn't count, must have been a finance professor, and also broke a modeling rule, used a number where a formula would have worked. So let's replace the number 5. Actually, first, let's hit F2, shift home, copy, escape, and come down here and say that in cell G19, single quote, paste, we found this original formula. Now let's go fix that formula. As I was saying, replace the 5 with this period minus this period. Close our parentheses. Make sure that last parentheses is black, and it lets you know that you have at least an even number of parentheses. Maybe they're not in the right place, but as far as Excel knows, they're correct, so it turned it black for us. Okay, now we can go back and copy that, F2, shift home, copy, escape, come over here, single quote, and paste. Okay, so NPV may be a little bit late. We could work top down, or we could come work through the explicit forecast period. Probably nothing wrong with doing NPV while we're there. You knew that I would put this problem on the quiz, that I would put an error in NPV, because that's the pitfall with NPV. So let's shift home, copy, escape, place that one here with a single quote and a paste, and say that we found it in G20. And as you know, we don't want to include the first cash flow because we don't want it to be discounted. So we're going to take it, put it out front, add it. What you may not have caught is that there was another error. NPV doesn't discount by the growth rate. It discounts by the discount rate. So let's fix that as well. And let's hit F2, shift home, copy, escape, single quote, paste. And we have 2 here. I'm going to copy the first one, hit F2, and say, now in this particular problem, I gave 2 points for this one, so I gave partial credit for either one of those errors that you found. In subsequent problems, you had to get the entire formula correct in order to get any credit. Now let's move down and look at our growth rate. So 2018 value is 2017 times 1 plus the growth rate. That's correct, but you notice there are no dollar signs, so it's probably going to be difficult to copy. Let's just see what happened. I'm going to hit Tab to go to the next cell, F2, and sure enough, Tab F2 tells us that the dollar signs were left off and the error was copied. So that error really is F24 through J24. Please always use a colon to show a range, just like Excel does. And as I told you in class and in the example video, all you need to do is show me how to correct that first formula, and then I will trust that you corrected it in your model. And then the only cell we have not checked in this model yet is the terminal value. F2 tells us that we're adding the cash flow multiple to the previous year. We should be multiplying it. So let's copy that. Okay, and given the 2 points on G20, this problem was worth a total of 5. Moving on. Problem 2, when we look at this one, and I believe this was the one where we had an intern from University of Texas, so this is probably going to have a lot of errors in it. Had some inputs. Let's make sure they're all values. Had a white cell here that doesn't appear to be an input. It's not formatted as an input, but it does have a value typed into it, so we have a problem there. When we look at what it is, it's the number of payments, which of course would be the number of years times the period per year. So we need to make that a formula. Okay, our input for interest rate is in fact an input. It's a value. That's good. Periodic interest rate, same situation as above. That should simply be the interest rate divided by the number of periods in a year, because that's how banks determine the periodic interest rate on loans. And then we have a cell formatted as an output. This is the mortgage payment. Uses the PMT function, which is good. Let's see if it uses it correctly. We know if we click there, the first argument in the PMT function is the periodic interest rate. That's correct. So the number of periods is correct, but we're using a number where a formula will work. Present value is the original loan amount with a negative sign in front of it. And we aren't told that our payments are anywhere but the end of the period, and that's all we've done in this course, so we can assume the rest of that is correct. We'll just fix the 360. Now let's look at the loan table itself. Okay, we've got payment, our beginning balance at the beginning of the period, the total payment, which should be the same every month, the interest portion of that payment, which should be decreasing, the principal portion should be increasing, and then the end of the balance at the end of the month should be a little bit less than it was at the first of the month. So it looks like we're getting off to a good start. Let's look a little more closely. When I look at where the initial balance comes from, sure enough, it's another value instead of a formula. Let's look at the first payment. Again, it's a value instead of a formula. Let's look at the interest portion of the payment. Do you notice a pattern here? Lots of values instead of formulas. Now the principal portion of the payment takes the entire payment, subtracts off the interest portion, and that's correct. Some of you chose to reference the total payment up here and lock that cell. That's fine as well, but if your table shows the total payment, it's perfectly fine to use it here. You got 0 points for fixing that, but really there's nothing wrong with it. It's a matter of preference. Just wasn't an error that deserved a point to be fixed. Okay, finally, the end of period balance is the beginning of period minus the principal. So the top row of our table is correct. The beginning balance in the second month is the beginning in the first month minus the principal portion. And it was a bit misleading. A lot of you corrected this and put the balance, simply referred it to the end of balance period. I think that's better form than the way I had it in the model. So I went ahead and gave you a point for that. But for those of you who didn't, it's not wrong. So I went ahead and gave you 0.8 of a point for that. That's splitting hairs is the difference on those two. Both of those were bonus, by the way, so neither side should complain. The total payment Here we have the value again, so we just need to copy that top row down. I always like to get the second row correct before I start copying anything. And so really what it looks like is all those errors on the top row, at least the errors in D and E, were really for the entire column. So to follow the instructions perfectly, we should do it this way, but certainly nothing I took off for if you didn't list the entire range. Just helps me know what you were fixing. And at this point, we typically copy down our table. Now I threw in an extra error down here. If we go to the bottom to see if the loan paid off, I just wanted people to look and see if the loan was already getting paid off. Maybe that would give them a comfort factor that there were no errors. I don't think anyone fell into that trap, but a lot of people didn't find this error because they copied down from the top over it. I don't see anything wrong with that. And so if you found the error, I gave you a bonus point, but if you didn't, I certainly didn't take off. So we will copy all of those cells down and see if the loan pays off. And most of you know by now that since there were only 300 periods, the loan didn't pay off. So you can list this error wherever you like. I listed it at B324 and then copied this down 60 rows. Not with Control C, but we want that 299, 300 to continue to count. And I think about 383 or 384 gets us to the right number of payments. We'll delete the ones we don't need. And now we in fact calculate the zero at the bottom of the table. And that's all for problem 2. Okay, in problem 3, I think this was the one where the cat chased a mouse across your keyboard. That always throws some errors in your model. So we'll check all these inputs and make sure they're values. First thing that jumps out at us is this one is not a value. All our inputs should be. So that one should be formatted as an input. We already know NPV per share is something that we calculate based on NPV and share count. So that was simply a formatting issue. Okay, so if we look at this model, we have a revenue growth rate and an NPV, and this time an NPV per share. Looks very similar to the first model with some historical data, an explicit forecast period, and a terminal value. Looks like this time we're calculating expenses a bit differently, adding some overhead, getting to our B-tax cash flow, and this time we're actually taxing it. I think there was a tax rate up here in the inputs. And then our after-tax flow, after-tax cash flow for the explicit period, and then a terminal value. So let's check these formulas. A revenue growth rate. This time the author used a rate function but made the same mistake of using a formula, using a number where a formula would work. Let's see if we are forecasting our revenue correctly using that correct growth rate now. Prior cell times 1 plus the growth rate. The answer is correct, but We do not need absolute references on the first one, and we do on the second one. And we need to use a formula on the second one instead of a value. Correction, that number would not have been correct because there was another error using 8% instead of the 4.21, which is the revenue growth rate. And that formula continues into the range. So I'll list it this way, copy the formula down. Okay, next our variable expenses are revenue times the average of historical ratio. Notice if I copy this down, then the revenue won't move and the expenses will, the ratio will. We want to change the absolute reference on those. Some of you put a cell up here to hold the expense revenue ratio average. That was probably a great idea. I didn't do that in my solution, but that's a fine way to do it as well. A lot of you changed column H. I really don't see anything wrong with column H. H21 absolute would copy down just fine in column H. However, in column I, the cell will not copy down well. It will continue to look at 2018. So we need to remove all the absolute references. Some of you removed only those to row, and that's fine, but we need to remove at least the ones to row. We can select the entire group and hit F4 3 times, and that will fix it. Okay, moving on to taxes. Looks like we've got a number where a formula would work, and somebody was being tricky and used the wrong number. Also looks like our relative and absolute need to be fixed there. Okay, finally we get to column K, and again we see way too many absolute references. And let's look at the terminal value. This time we are dividing by 6. We should be multiplying by the terminal value. References don't matter on this cell because it will never be copied. And finally, let's come look at NPV. This time it looks good. We've got a number in front and then an NPV. We've even got a number in the back. Let's see what all we're doing here. Somebody threw revenue in there for no good reason. They're discounting all the cash flows and adding terminal value on at the end. That means the terminal value is not getting discounted. So let's get rid of that and extend that range that is getting discounted to include the terminal value. And then the revenue growth rate again is being used for the discount rate. So we can easily fix that.